Shalom from Jerusalem, and Parsha KiTisa is talking about golden calf. And of course the first answer is, how could they? How could the Jews who stood on Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, and have the national revelation, each one of them felt God's presence, went on 11 prophecy, how could they build the golden calf? And so let's look at what happened, and you'll be surprised, because the reason for building golden calf is usually not what most people understood is all about, and of course it's applicable to us today, so it's a great important lessons for us today. But first of all, let's hear the story and try to understand what's really going on. Now, Jews are waiting for Moshe Rabbeinu to come back, supposed to come back 40 days later, and Jews miscalculated the time. They miscalculated one day. Why? Because, see, sometimes when Moshe Rabbeinu went to Har Sinai, this day of departure, do you count as the already days that he's on the mountain? You count it as not as a day of mountain. So that's where the problem started. So the Jews miscalculated one day. Now, let's think for a second about the emotional state of the Jews who are waiting for Moshe Rabbeinu comes back. Of course, you realize that there is a tremendous anticipation of what's going to happen, excitement, perhaps some fear, what are we going to learn, what's going to be, it's the whole thing. Now, the day comes, and here, every viewer who is a parent, you can understand, in this sense, because let's say you're waiting for your children to come home, and then half an hour later they're not home, an hour later they're not home, 2 hours later they're not home, and they say you begin to nervous, you begin to 3 hours, you begin to panic, and that's what's really happened. As a child who is waiting the parents, that can happen the same thing. So it says that exactly that's what happened. The Jews begin to feel very, very nervous, and then they feel nervous. They say, well, let's look. Use our spiritual sight and look at the top of Har Sinai, and maybe we can perceive, maybe we can see or sense what's happening there. And when they look at the top of the Har Sinai, our oral tradition says they see the whole spiritual world is in trembling. It's upside down. It's like it's all a commotion in the spiritual world. And the Jew says, it's like something happened to Moshe Rabbeinu. And at this point, it says the Satan, the devil, if you wish, shows a coffin of Moshe Rabbeinu going in the spiritual realm, in the spiritual world. And the Jew says, well, Moshe Rabbeinu must have died. And then they panic. And then they go to Aaron and says, create us powers, Elohim, create us powers that will lead us. And that's very, very important. Because we don't know what happened with Moshe Rabbeinu. So we can clearly see from the verses that they were not trying to replace God. They're trying to replace Moshe Rabbeinu as a connection to God. And they're saying that Moshe died, and other people also might die. So we like some permanent channel between us and God. And that was the idea of the golden calf was all about. So this panic created this attempt to create this channel. It was a grave mistake. Let's look at this. But you see, Rabbi Dessler, that's a very, very big Rav of the end of 19th century, beginning 20th century, he says, asks a brilliant question. He says, listen, devil, right, Satan, is not separate entity. It's a spiritual power, if you wish, an angel, that spiritual power is of God, and he can show people whatever he wants. He can entice, he can scare, he can show us our inadequacies, that's his job, and he prosecutes us, but that's not, he can just show coffins in heaven, which is a lie. So what's going on? So what's happening is here, tell us Rabbi Dessler the following. Jews begin to worry. And as the Jews begin to worry, they look at the top of Har Sinai and they see that the whole spiritual world is in trembling, it's a turmoil. What they don't understand, that the reason that the spiritual world are trembling is because Jews are worried. And when Jews, and especially Jews on a high spiritual level, begin to worry, that's affect the spiritual world. So what they're really looking, they're looking at the mirror and not realizing that. Now when they see that the spiritual world are trembling, not realizing that this has come from them, it's a reflection of them, their cause, they're thinking that something happened. Now, you know, like when we panic, what do we think happened to our close ones or to our children? And, you know, things that, God forbid, you know, that they die. That's exactly what they're thinking. So at this point, the Satan shows them exactly what they're fearing, exactly what they're thinking about. So then he shows them the coffin of Moshe Rabbeinu go in the sky. And of course, they don't recognize that this is projecting of their own thoughts. So the Jews panic even more, and they creating the golden calf. And that happens with us all the time. Think about it. When we get nervous, sometimes this nervousness affects our muscles and we recognize it. But sometimes it can affect our organs. So people feel pain in the stomach, or they can pain in the heart. And sometimes people begin to get even scared. They say, oh, I'm having a heart attack, or something is happening with my stomach. So this fear creates even more pain. The pain creates even more panic. And of course, the panic, the fear creates even more pain. And that's one thing. Sometimes it's not the pain. Sometimes when people are nervous, it creates the feeling of emptiness in the stomach. And people don't recognize it, confuse it with a hunger. So they're trying to stuff it with food. And it works for a very short period of time. But that's why a lot of people who get very obese cannot stop eating, just simply because, you know, this nervousness, somehow you have to satisfy them. So that's become, if you wish, again, attempt to build the food becomes like a golden calf in a sense, right? You know, attempt to fill this void that should be really filled with proper emotion and proper spiritual connection and security instead of insecurity. Fears usually works this way because fears create what we're afraid. Very often you see when we're afraid of criticism, we're afraid somebody criticizing us. So how do we behave towards these people? Sometimes we avoid them. Sometimes we attack them. Sometimes we behave not naturally. And when that happens, of course, the people respond or react to us. And then we look there and say, you know, like, look at this person, and the person is not looking at me the right way. We don't understand. The world around us is a mirror of what's happening inside of us. That's the biggest lesson that we really need to learn from the golden calf. The mistakes we're making today, that the world around reflects what's happening inside. We're changing ourselves, the world around also magically, if you wish, changes. Works every single time. The change has to be very real. Now, another very important lesson we're learning from golden calf is that, remember, people want permanent connection. They want gold, which is permanency, and God says it doesn't work. In relationships, it's never work. It means that you cannot base your relationship on something that happened yesterday or something that happened even a few hours ago. The relationship has to be renewed. Imagine a husband when the wife asks her, like, honey, you know, you're not telling anything nice to me, do you love me? And the man says, of course I love you, you know, like a week ago I told you that I love you, and if anything changes, I'll notify you, you know. It's like, okay, of course we all understand that when we're in love, when we have a relationship, this relationship is alive, and that's have to be renewed every moment. And that's what God really telling us. He says you cannot use some kind of quote-unquote permanent channel. It cannot be habit, because the minute it's become habit, the minute we do mitzvahs by habit, the minute we are praying by habit, the minute we, any time we're trying to make something just permanent out of it, it's also creating a golden calf. So I just want to wish everybody that we should recognize when we see the world around and something that we don't like, look inside yourself, see what we can change, and the world will change. And secondly, have a beautiful, alive, second-to-second connection, love relationship with God that always fresh. The best. Shalom, shalom from Jerusalem.